The Golden Rule of the Immediate Hook, Storage Drama Edition. The padlock snapped with a sound like breaking bone, and Martha Hendricks felt her arthritic fingers tremble as the rusted metal fell into the desert dust at her feet. Beside her, Gerald's breathing had gone shallow, that wheeze that came when his heart medication wore thin. And she wanted to tell him to sit down, to rest, to let this foolish dream go. But the corrugated steel door was already rolling upward on screaming tracks, and the late afternoon sun of Barstow, California was pouring into a space that hadn't seen daylight in 7 years. The smell hit first. Cedar and leather, expensive and wrong for a place like this. Then Martha saw the furniture, real furniture, the kind she'd only dusted in other people's houses during 40 years of cleaning. Stacked so carefully, it looked like someone had been planning to come back. A mahogany desk caught the light. Oil paintings in gilt frames leaned against boxes marked fragile in a hand that had known fountain pens. And there, just visible beneath a canvas tarp, the chrome edge of something that made her throat close. A wheelchair, child-sized, with a stuffed rabbit still strapped to the armrest. Wait, before you see what's inside. If this story already has your heart pounding, tell us where you're watching from. When forgotten boxes open, when second chances hide under dust and debt, subscribe and stay close. You'll never guess what's been left behind. Now, back to the lock clicking open. Martha. Gerald's voice cracked on her name. Martha, look at this. She didn't want to look. 73 years old, and she'd learned that looking too closely at beautiful things only reminded you of everything you'd never have. The trailer park where they lived, Lot 37 at Desert Vista, where the air conditioning was a box fan and the rent ate half Gerald's Social Security, didn't have room for mahogany or gilt frames. It barely had room for their fold-out couch and the hot plate they called a kitchen. But Gerald was already inside, his work boots crunching on scattered packing peanuts, and Martha had made a promise 52 years ago that she wouldn't let him walk into the darkness alone. She stepped across the threshold into Unit 247. The air felt different here, cooler, despite the furnace heat of the California desert in August, like the space had been holding its breath, waiting. Martha moved past a leather sofa, cognac-colored, butter-soft, and her cleaning woman's eye caught the details. No water damage, no mold, everything preserved like a museum. Whoever had packed this unit had done it with care, with love. "There's gotta be $50,000 worth of furniture in here," Gerald said, his voice climbing with something Martha recognized as dangerous, hope. Maybe more. That desk alone, Martha, that's real mahogany, and these paintings. He was running his hand over a landscape in oil, some European countryside rendered in colors that seemed to glow even in the dim light filtering through the door. Martha wanted to pull his hand back, to remind him that they didn't touch things like this, that people like them looked but never held. "We won it fair," Gerald said, reading her silence. $200, that's all it cost. $200 and 7 years of storage fees, and the owner never came back. It's legal, Martha. It's ours. $200. Their grocery money for the month. Gerald had seen the auction notice posted at the storage facility office when he'd gone to pay for their own unit, a 5x5 space that held everything they'd salvaged when the bank took their house in Phoenix. Photo albums, Gerald's Vietnam medals, Martha's mother's china wrapped in newspaper. He'd come home with his eyes bright, talking about abandoned storage units and bidding wars and people who made thousands reselling forgotten treasures. Martha had said no. Had said they couldn't afford to gamble. Had said that hope was expensive, and disappointment was a luxury they'd used up. But Gerald had gone anyway, taking the cash from the coffee can under the sink where they kept the emergency fund. Had stood in the desert sun with 18 other bidders while a man with a clipboard read off the terms. Unit 247, property of Lawrence and Margaret Ashford, 7 years delinquent, contents to be auctioned as is. Had watched the door roll up just enough to glimpse shapes in the darkness. Had raised his hand when the auctioneer called for 200, then 250, then 300, his heart hammering like it hadn't since the Mekong Delta. And at 200, everyone else had stopped bidding. Because of the smell, Gerald had told her. Because it looked like regular furniture, nothing obviously valuable. Because the other bidders were professionals who knew to look for boxes, not sofas. But Gerald had seen something, or felt something. And now, here they were. "Help me move this tarp," he said, already tugging at the canvas. "There's more underneath." Martha's knees protested as she bent to help, her fingers finding the rough weave of the cloth. They pulled together, the way they'd done everything for 52 years, and the tarp came away in a cloud of dust that made them both cough. The wheelchair sat in the center of the revealed space, like an accusation. It was small, meant for a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old. The frame was titanium. Martha recognized it from the hospital where she'd worked briefly as an aide, before her back gave out. Custom-made and expensive. The rabbit strapped to the armrest was gray velvet, worn smooth at the ears from handling. Someone had loved this rabbit. Someone had held it so tightly the fabric had given up its pile. And behind the wheelchair, stacked in careful rows, were boxes. Dozens of them. Banker's boxes in brown cardboard, each one labeled in that same elegant hand. Medical records, therapy reports, equipment, correspondence. And one box, smaller than the rest, marked simply, Sophie. Gerald's hand found Martha's. She felt how cold his fingers were despite the heat. "There was a child," she whispered. "The owner's name was Ashford," Gerald said. "Lawrence and Margaret. That's what the auctioneer said." Martha moved to the box marked Sophie, then stopped. Opening boxes felt different than looking at furniture. Furniture was impersonal, resellable. But a box with a name on it? That was a life. That was someone's daughter. "We should find them," she said. "The Ashfords. We should return this." "Martha." Gerald's voice was gentle, the way it got when he had to explain things she didn't want to understand. "They abandoned it. 7 years. That means they stopped paying in 2016. Whatever happened, they walked away. People don't walk away from their children's things, not unless—" She couldn't finish, couldn't speak the words that hung in the climate-controlled air of Unit 247. Gerald squeezed her hand. "Well, look through it. Careful. See if there's anything that tells us what happened. If we can find them, we'll try. But Martha, we also have to be practical. We need this, the furniture at least. Rent's due in 2 weeks, and the trailer park manager already told me this is our last warning." Practical. Martha had been practical for 73 years. Practical was marrying Gerald when she was 21 instead of going to college like she dreamed. Practical was working 3 cleaning jobs to keep their heads above water when the factory laid him off in '92. Practical was selling their house, the house where they'd raised their son, where every room held a memory, to pay for Gerald's heart surgery when Medicare wouldn't cover enough. Practical had gotten them a 10-by-8 trailer in the desert and a storage unit they couldn't afford to keep. "Let me open the box," Martha said. Gerald nodded. He understood. In their marriage, there were things that were his to carry, and things that were hers. Children, even other people's children, had always been hers. The box wasn't sealed. The flaps folded over each other, the kind of closure that said someone might come back, might need to look again. Martha's hands were steady as she opened them, though her heart was not. Inside, photographs. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, organized in clear sleeves and labeled with dates. Martha lifted the first sleeve carefully. A baby girl, maybe 3 months old, lying on a white blanket. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful. Beautiful, Martha thought. She looked like those Renaissance paintings of cherubs, all soft curves and innocence. The next photo, the same baby, older now, maybe 6 months, eyes open. Something in her gaze that Martha recognized from her years as a cleaning woman in other people's homes, seeing other people's children. Intelligence, curiosity, life. The third photo, the baby held by a woman. Margaret Ashford, Martha assumed. Early 30s, blonde hair pulled back, wearing a sweater that looked expensive even in the photograph. She was smiling at the camera, but her eyes were on the baby, and the love there was so fierce it made Martha's chest hurt. "She's beautiful," Gerald said, softly, looking over Martha's shoulder. Martha turned to the next page, and the next. The photos told a story that needed no words. Sophie at 1 year old, sitting up, playing with blocks. Sophie at 18 months, in a hospital bed, tubes and wires visible. Sophie at 2, in the titanium wheelchair, holding the gray rabbit, her smile bright despite everything. Sophie at 3, at 4, at 5, growing, changing, living in frames that marked time like a metronome counting down. The last photo in the first sleeve, Sophie at what looked like 6 years old, in a garden somewhere green and beautiful. Spring flowers bloomed around her wheelchair. She wore a yellow dress and a crown of daisies in her dark hair. Her mother knelt beside her, forehead pressed against Sophie's, both of them laughing at something beyond the frame. Martha had to sit down. Gerald dragged over a leather ottoman, hundreds of dollars worth of furniture reduced to a seat for a 73-year-old woman whose knees couldn't hold her grief. And Martha sat, clutching the photographs, unable to look away. "Keep going," Gerald said quietly. "See if there's anything that explains." Martha didn't want to keep going. She wanted to put the photographs back, to seal the box, to pretend she'd never broken the lock on Unit 247. But Gerald was right. They needed to understand. She reached into the box again and pulled out a manila folder, legal-sized, bulging with papers. The tab read, "Medical Summary." Inside, photocopies of hospital records. Martha had cleaned enough doctor's offices to recognize the format: patient name, date of birth, diagnosis. Sophie Marie Ashford, born April 3, 2010. Diagnosis: spinal muscular atrophy, type 1. Martha had heard of SMA, had seen a made-for-TV movie about it once, years ago, something about children and muscles and wheelchairs. She scanned the documents, her cleaning woman's education struggling with the medical terminology, until she found a page that looked like it was written for parents instead of doctors. A patient information sheet printed from some medical website. Spinal muscular atrophy type 1, also known as Werdnig-Hoffmann disease, is a genetic condition that affects motor neurons. Children with SMA type 1 typically show symptoms before 6 months of age. Most do not live past 2 years without respiratory support. Martha's hands shook. Most do not live past 2 years. But Sophie had lived past 2 years. The photographs proved it. She'd lived to 6, maybe longer, which meant respirators, feeding tubes, round-the-clock care. Which meant money, oceans of it, rivers of it, more than Martha and Gerald had seen in their entire lives combined. "What's it say?" Gerald asked. Martha couldn't speak. She handed him the paper. She watched his face as he read, watched his jaw tighten, watched his eyes close briefly. Gerald had been a medic in Vietnam before the factory job, before the pension that evaporated when the company went bankrupt. He understood what the words meant. "Jesus," he whispered. Martha turned to another folder in the box. This one was labeled Insurance Correspondence. Letters, dozens of them, claims denied, appeals rejected, pre-authorization requests marked expired, bills with numbers that made Martha's vision blur, $47,000 for a ventilator, $12,000 per month for nursing care, $200,000 for a single hospital stay when Sophie's lungs had collapsed at age 4. And then, at the bottom of the stack, a letter on law firm stationery. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, as we discussed, the bankruptcy filing is complete. Under Chapter 7, your non-exempt assets will be liquidated to satisfy creditor claims. This includes your primary residence, your vehicle, and your investment accounts. You will be permitted to retain basic personal effects and up to $1,500 in cash. We strongly advise that you prioritize Sophie's ongoing care needs during this transition period. Please let us know if you require referrals for state assistance programs or hospice services. The letter was dated November 2015, 8 months before the storage unit went delinquent. Martha felt something break open inside her chest, not her heart, which had broken before, but something deeper. The place where she'd kept all her anger at the world, all her bitterness at the way life tilted the table so that some people ate caviar and some people counted out pennies for ramen noodles. Because here was proof that the table tilted for everyone. Lawrence and Margaret Ashford had been rich once. Rich enough for mahogany desks and gilt-frame paintings and a custom titanium wheelchair for their daughter. Rich enough to fight for 7 years. Martha could see it in the paper trail, in the denied claims and the appeals and the reappeals, to keep Sophie alive when the doctor said she wouldn't see her first birthday. And then they'd lost everything. Not because they were lazy or foolish or unlucky at cards, because they loved their daughter. Because love, when it ran headlong into the American healthcare system, was expensive enough to bankrupt anyone. We have to find them, Martha said. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'll start looking. The sun was setting by the time they locked Unit 247 back up, this time with their own lock, their own claim, and drove back to Desert Vista in their 1998 Honda Civic with the cracked windshield and the passenger door that stuck. Gerald drove in silence, his hands tight on the wheel, and Martha sat beside him holding the box marked SOP against her chest like it might escape. The trailer park looked worse than usual in the failing light. Lot 37 sat at the back corner, where the dust devils formed in the afternoon and the sound of the highway never quite died. Their trailer was a single wide from 1987, its white siding gone gray with time and desert grit, its metal steps rusted through in places where Martha had to watch her footing. Home, such as it was. Gerald held the door while Martha climbed the steps, still clutching the box. Inside, the trailer was exactly as they'd left it. The fold-out couch that served as their bed, the kitchenette with the hot plate and the mini-fridge, the card table where they ate their meals and did their paperwork and pretended their lives hadn't shrunk to fit inside a space smaller than their old living room had been. Martha set the box down on the card table and sank into one of the folding chairs. "I'll make coffee," Gerald said. It was what he always said when the world felt too big. Coffee. The ritual of it. Water from the jug, the trailer's pipes only worked sometimes, into the electric kettle. Instant coffee from the jar. Powdered creamer that never quite dissolved. While he worked, Martha opened her laptop, the used Dell they'd bought at Goodwill 3 years ago when Gerald had insisted they needed to get online to stay connected, and waited for the ancient machine to wake up. She typed, Lawrence Ashford, Sophie, SMA, Barstow. The search results loaded slowly. A Facebook page appeared first, but it was private, just a profile picture of a man in his 40s with kind eyes and graying temples. She clicked through to another result, a newspaper article from the Barstow Desert Dispatch, dated March 2016. The headline made her breath catch. Local family loses everything in medical bankruptcy. Community rallies to help. There was a photograph. Lawrence Ashford, the same man from Facebook, standing beside a blonde woman Martha recognized from the photos in the box, Margaret. They stood in front of a house, a nice house with a two-car garage and flowering shrubs, holding a sign that read "Foreclosure Sale." Between them, in the titanium wheelchair, Sophie smiled up at the camera. Martha forced herself to read. Lawrence and Margaret Ashford never expected to lose their home. The couple, who have lived in Barstow for 8 years, were successful business owners until their daughter Sophie was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy in 2010. "We thought insurance would cover it," Lawrence said in an interview Thursday. "We had good insurance. We did everything right. But when Sophie needed a ventilator and round-the-clock nursing care, the bills started piling up. Within 2 years, we'd hit our lifetime maximum." The couple spent the next 4 years fighting insurance companies, appealing denied claims, and eventually exhausting their savings, their retirement accounts, and their home equity to pay for Sophie's care. "We'd do it again," Margaret said, her hand on her daughter's wheelchair. "Sophie is worth every penny, but we never imagined we'd end up here." The family filed for bankruptcy in November and lost their home to foreclosure in February. They are currently living with friends and relying on a GoFundMe campaign to cover Sophie's ongoing medical needs. "The community has been amazing," Lawrence said, "but we're not sure how much longer we can keep this up. Sophie's doctors say she's doing well, all things considered, but the cost of keeping her alive it's more than we ever imagined." The article ended with a link to the GoFundMe page. Martha clicked it with shaking fingers. The campaign page loaded. Goal: $100,000. Raised $47,392. But the page was frozen in time. The last update had been posted in July 2016. "Thank you all for your incredible support," Lawrence had written. "We've been overwhelmed by your generosity. Unfortunately, Sophie's medical needs continue to exceed what we're able to raise. We're exploring other options and will keep you updated." There were no more updates. Martha scrolled through the comments. Hundreds of them, from people she'd never met, in towns she'd never heard of. Praying for Sophie. "Stay strong, Ashford family. God bless you all." And then, near the bottom, a comment from November 2016. "Does anyone know if the Ashfords are okay? The page hasn't been updated in months, and I've been trying to reach them. Please let me know if you hear anything." 37 replies, all variations of the same question. Has anyone heard from them? No one had. "Gerald," Martha said. He appeared beside her, 2 mugs of bad coffee in his hands. He set one down in front of her and looked at the screen. 7 years, Martha said. "The storage unit went delinquent in July 2016. Right after the last GoFundMe update." "They must have run out of money," Gerald said quietly, "for everything, including the storage. But where did they go? Where's Sophie?" Gerald didn't answer. He didn't have to. Martha closed her eyes and saw it. Lawrence and Margaret Ashford, bankrupt and homeless, their daughter requiring equipment and nursing care they could no longer afford. Saw them making the choice that no parent should ever have to make. Saw them packing up the beautiful things, the mahogany desk, the gilt-framed paintings, the evidence of the life they'd had before, and putting it all in a storage unit, thinking maybe, somehow, they'd find a way to come back, and then deciding the only way forward was to let go completely. "We have to find out what happened," Martha said. "We have to know if Sophie—" "I know." Gerald's hand found her shoulder. "Well, look, I promise." Martha turned back to the computer and started searching again. Obituaries, hospital records. Those were private, but she tried anyway. Public records for Barstow, for San Bernardino County, for anywhere in California. Nothing. The Ashford family had vanished like smoke. "Try Facebook again," Gerald suggested. "See if any of their friends posted anything." Martha went back to Lawrence Ashford's profile. Still private, but Facebook's search function showed her something else. A page called Sophie's Journey. Her finger hesitated over the mouse. Then she clicked. The page loaded. A public page created in 2011 dedicated to Sophie Ashford. Photos of Sophie, the same ones Martha had seen in the box, plus hundreds more. Videos of Sophie, laughing. Sophie playing with therapy dogs. Sophie in the pool with flotation devices, her face bright with joy. Updates from Lawrence and Margaret, charting every milestone. Sophie smiled today for the first time in 2 weeks. Sophie's new ventilator is working beautifully. Sophie loves the therapy horses. And then, at the bottom, the final post. November 17, 2016. No words, just a photograph. Sophie in her wheelchair, surrounded by family. Martha could see Lawrence and Margaret, plus others who must have been grandparents, siblings, friends. They were in a park somewhere, autumn leaves on the ground, the light golden and soft. Sophie wore the yellow dress from the photograph in the box, and everyone was smiling. Everyone. The comments on the photo ran into the thousands. Martha started reading, her coffee forgotten and growing cold. She's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing her with us. What an inspiration. And then, buried in the middle, a comment from a user named Jenny_Barstow_RN. I was one of Sophie's night nurses for 2 years. The Ashford family is the strongest, most loving family I've ever had the privilege to know. When they told us they couldn't afford nursing care anymore, my heart broke. If anyone knows where they are now, please let me know. I've been trying to find them. 23 replies, all asking the same thing. Did you ever find them? Jenny had replied to one, dated January 2017. No, I've tried everything. It's like they disappeared. Martha's hands were shaking so hard she had to set down her coffee mug. They took her somewhere, she said. Somewhere they couldn't keep updating Facebook. Somewhere without GoFundMe pages or community support. They took her and they... We don't know that, Gerald said sharply. We don't know anything. But his voice was hollow. He knew. They both knew. There was only one reason a family would disappear like that. Only one place they could go when the money ran out and their child needed round-the-clock medical care to survive. State care, Martha whispered. They gave her up. The silence in the trailer was absolute. Martha had cleaned for enough families to know what state care meant for a child like Sophie. Group homes. Rotating nurses who might or might not be gentle. Facilities where the staff was overworked and the equipment was old and the children were kept clean and fed and alive, but nothing more. No yellow dresses, no daisies in the hair, no laughing with mother, foreheads pressed together in gardens full of spring flowers. Maybe it was the best they could do, Gerald said. Maybe she's still alive. Maybe she's getting good care. Maybe. Martha looked down at the box on the card table, at the photos of Sophie smiling, of Margaret and Lawrence loving their daughter with everything they had, at the evidence of 7 years of fighting, of refusing to give up, of spending themselves into bankruptcy because love demanded it. And then at the storage unit notice, the one that said July 2016, the one that meant they'd finally let go. I want to find them, Martha said, before we sell anything, before we touch the furniture. I want to know what happened to Sophie. Gerald nodded slowly. I'll help, but Martha, if we can't find them, if they're gone or if they don't want to be found, we're going to need that furniture. We're $400 short on rent, and the manager already told me this is our last chance. I know. And even if we find them, they can't pay us anything. They're bankrupt. If they wanted the storage unit back, they'd have paid the fees. I know. So we're doing this for ourselves, to feel better, not because it's going to change anything. Martha looked at her husband. 52 years, and he still thought she didn't understand how the world worked. "I'm doing this," she said quietly, "because someone has to remember. Because that little girl in the photographs deserved better than being forgotten in a storage unit. Because her parents loved her enough to lose everything, and that matters, even if we're the only ones who know it matters." Gerald's eyes were wet. He nodded and looked away. "Okay," he said. "Okay, we'll find them." It took 3 days. 3 days of Martha sitting at the card table with the laptop, running searches and following threads so thin they barely existed. 3 days of Gerald pacing the small confines of the trailer, his heart medication running low because they couldn't afford the refill yet, his face gray with worry. 3 days of living inside Sophie Ashford's life, learning her story through medical records and Facebook posts and the paper trail of a family's destruction. On the evening of the 3rd day, Martha found something. Not the Ashfords. They were ghosts, vanished from every database and directory and social media platform. But Jenny Barstow, RN, the nurse who had left the comment on Facebook. Jenny Morrison, it turned out. Still living in Barstow. Still working as an RN, but at a different facility now, a long-term care center on the east side of town. Martha called the center, asked for Jenny, was told Jenny was on shift but couldn't come to the phone. So Martha drove. The Honda's air conditioning had died 2 summers ago, and the 40-minute drive across Barstow felt like crossing the surface of the sun. Martha's shirt was soaked with sweat by the time she pulled into the parking lot of Sunrise Long-Term Care, a low concrete building surrounded by struggling palm trees. Inside, the air was cold enough to make her shiver. A woman at the front desk, young, tired, wearing scrubs covered in cartoon cats, looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Jenny Morrison. It's about Sophie Ashford." The woman's expression changed, softened. "You knew Sophie?" "No, but I need to talk to someone who did." The woman picked up a phone, spoke quietly, hung up. "Jenny's coming. Have a seat." Martha sat in a waiting room chair that had probably been new in 1995 and waited. Around her, the facility hummed with the sounds of long-term care, wheels on linoleum, voices calling for help that might or might not come quickly enough. "Hello?" Martha looked up. A woman in her 40s, dark hair pulled back, scrubs faded from too many washings. Kind face, tired eyes. "Are you Jenny Morrison?" "I am. You asked about Sophie Ashford." Martha stood. Her knees protested, but she ignored them. "I'm Martha Hendricks. My husband and we bought a storage unit at auction. It belonged to Lawrence and Margaret Ashford. It has Sophie's things, her wheelchair, her medical records, photographs, everything." Jenny's hand went to her mouth. "I've been trying to find them," Martha continued, "the Ashfords, to give everything back, but they've disappeared. I thought maybe you—" "They're dead," Jenny said. The words hung in the cold air. "Both of them?" Martha whispered. Jenny nodded. She gestured to a small conference room off the waiting area. "Come here. I'll tell you what I know." They sat across from each other at a plastic table. Jenny folded her hands, and Martha saw they were shaking. "I was Sophie's night nurse for 2 years," Jenny said, "from when she was 3 until just after her 5th birthday. The Ashfords they were amazing. They did everything for her, everything. Most parents of kids with SMA type 1, they burn out. They put their kids in facilities. Not because they don't love them, they do, but because it's too hard. The feeding tubes, the ventilators, the constant care. It breaks people." "But not the Ashfords," Martha said. "Not the Ashfords. Lawrence worked from home so he could be with Sophie during the day. Margaret managed all the medical appointments, all the insurance fights. They had a whole team, PTs, OTs, respiratory therapists. They threw Sophie birthday parties with all her friends from the SMA support group. They took her to the beach, to the mountains. They lived." "What happened?" Jenny's eyes closed. "Insurance. It's always insurance.
Sophie hit her lifetime maximum when she was 4. After that, every claim was a battle. Eventually, the insurance company just started denying everything. Lawrence and Margaret appealed, went to court, got lawyers. But it takes time, and Sophie needed care now. So they paid out of pocket, went through their savings, took out loans, mortgaged the house, sold everything they could sell. And then they went bankrupt. Yeah, November 2015. Lost the house in February 2016. After that, they stayed with Margaret's parents for a while, but it was too much. Sophie needed too much. The grandparents' house wasn't set up for her equipment. So Lawrence and Margaret found a motel, one of those extended stay places. Lived there for a few months, trying to figure out what to do. "The GoFundMe," Martha said. "I saw it raised almost $50,000. Jenny nodded. "It helped, but Sophie's care cost $10,000 a month, minimum. More when she got sick, which was often. The money ran out fast. And then they made the choice. July 2016. They called me one night. I'd given them my personal number, told them to call any time. And Lawrence was crying, actually crying. Said they couldn't do it anymore, couldn't keep Sophie alive. They'd called every program, every charity, every government agency. But Sophie didn't qualify for most of it because Lawrence had a job, made too much money. Never mind that every penny went to medical bills." Jenny's voice broke. She paused, collected herself. They decided to go to Oregon, to use their law. The room tilted. Martha gripped the edge of the table. The Death with Dignity Act? Yes. Sophie didn't qualify. She was too young, and the law requires you to self-administer. But there's a hospice there, in Portland. They help families, give kids comfort care when the parents can't afford the alternative. Lawrence and Margaret drove there with Sophie in August 2016. "I got a call from Margaret in September." Jenny's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Sophie died on September 22nd, 2016. She was 6 years old. Margaret said she was holding her, said Sophie slipped away in her sleep, in her arms, without pain. Lawrence scattered her ashes in a state park outside Portland, some place with trees and flowers, somewhere beautiful." "And the Ashfords?" Martha asked, though she already knew. "They stayed in Portland. Margaret called me one more time in November. Said they couldn't come back to Barstow. Too many memories, too much grief. She said they were trying to start over. Lawrence was looking for work. They were living in their car." "And after that?" Jenny shook her head. "Nothing. I tried calling. The number was disconnected. I searched for them on Facebook, in obituaries, everywhere. It's like they disappeared. Maybe they finally found their footing somewhere. Maybe they're still out there, trying to rebuild. Or maybe—" She didn't finish. Martha understood. Depression was a real and terrible thing. Parents who lost children sometimes didn't survive their grief, especially parents who'd lost everything else, too. "I'm sorry," Jenny said. "I'm sorry you had to hear all this." Martha sat very still. She felt hollowed out, like someone had reached inside her and scooped away everything except sadness. "The storage unit," she finally said. "It has Sophie's things, her photographs, her wheelchair. There's a stuffed rabbit." "The gray one?" "That was Sophie's favorite. She called him Mr. Hops. Slept with him every night." "Do you want it? Any of it?" Jenny looked startled. "The storage unit is yours. You bought it." "I don't want it. I just want—" Martha stopped. What did she want? To undo the last 7 years? To save Sophie? To make the American healthcare system care about children instead of profit margins? "I want Sophie to be remembered," she said finally. "I want someone to know that she lived and that she mattered." Jenny's eyes filled. She mattered. God, she mattered. That little girl taught me more about joy and resilience than anyone I've ever met. She couldn't walk, couldn't breathe on her own, couldn't eat without a feeding tube. And she smiled. She laughed. She loved her parents so much you could see it. When Margaret would come home from running errands, Sophie's face would just light up, like the sun coming out. Martha's throat was too tight to speak. "Keep the furniture," Jenny said. "Sell it. Use the money. Lawrence and Margaret would want that. They'd want something good to come from all this. But the personal things, Sophie's box, the photographs, the rabbit, if you're willing, I'd like to take those. I've been thinking about creating a memorial page for her. Nothing big, just somewhere online where people can remember her, where the families still fighting for their kids can see that someone cared." "Yes," Martha said. "Yes, please." They sat together in silence for a moment. Then Jenny stood and gave Martha her address, her phone number, her email. "Bring the box whenever you're ready," she said. "And thank you for trying to find them, for caring. Most people wouldn't have bothered." Martha drove back to Desert Vista with the afternoon sun beating down on the Honda's cracked windshield. She didn't turn on the radio, didn't want noise or distraction. She just drove, thinking about Sophie Ashford, 6 years old, a lifetime of fighting compressed into a span shorter than the blink of history's eye, a child who'd smiled despite everything, who'd loved and been loved so fiercely her parents had sacrificed everything. And for what? The question sat like stones in Martha's stomach. For 6 years, that's what. 6 years of Sophie laughing and smiling and lighting up when her mother came home. 6 years of Lawrence and Margaret getting to be her parents, getting to love her, getting to see her grow in the ways she could grow. Was that enough? Was 6 years of Sophie's life worth a bankruptcy and a foreclosure and a family's destruction? Martha didn't know. She just knew that right now she had a storage unit full of beautiful things that a family had abandoned because their daughter had died and their hearts had broken and the world had moved on without them. And she knew what she was going to do. Gerald was waiting when she got back, sitting on the metal steps of the trailer in the fading light. He stood when he saw her face. "You found out." "Sophie died. September 2016. The Ashfords took her to Oregon, to a hospice." She watched Gerald absorb it, watched his shoulders slump. "And the parents?" "Nobody knows. Jenny, the nurse I talked to, thinks they're alive somewhere, starting over, but she doesn't know for sure." Gerald sat back down heavily. Martha joined him, and they sat together on the rusted steps, looking out at the trailer park. The peeling paint, and the sagging roofs, and the cars held together with duct tape and hope. "We can sell the furniture," Gerald said finally. "There's probably enough to cover rent for 6 months, maybe more. Give us time to figure things out." "I know. And we can keep looking for the Ashfords. Maybe put the money in escrow or something, in case they come back." "They're not coming back, Gerald. They left everything behind, including Sophie." "Then what do you want to do?" Martha thought about Sophie's smile in the photographs, about Margaret pressing her forehead against her daughter's, about Lawrence standing in front of his foreclosed house, holding a sign and trying to be brave, about a family who'd loved so hard they'd lost everything, and what they'd left behind in a storage unit in the California desert. "I want to do something good," she said, "with the money. Something that would have mattered to them." "Like what?" "I don't know yet, but not this. Not just paying rent and surviving." Gerald was quiet for a long time. Then he reached over and took her hand. "Okay," he said. "Well, figure it out." It took 2 weeks to empty Unit 247. They worked slowly, Martha and Gerald, sorting through 7 years of accumulated grief. The furniture they moved first, hired 2 high school kids with a truck to help haul the heavy pieces. The mahogany desk alone brought $3,200 from an antique dealer in San Bernardino. The leather sofa, $1,800. The oil paintings, $900 each, 6 of them. By the time they'd sold everything except Sophie's personal boxes, they had $18,750 in cash. More money than Martha had seen in 5 years. Gerald wanted to cry when he counted it, wanted to take it straight to the bank to pay off the trailer lot fees and the credit card debt and the medical bills that still came in from his surgery 2 years ago. But Martha had made him promise. Something good, she'd said. We promised. So, instead of going to the bank, they went back to the laptop. Back to searching. This time, not for the Ashfords, but for something else. Martha found it on a Thursday afternoon, while Gerald was at the senior center playing chess with the other old men who had nothing but time. A non-profit organization called Sophie's Hope, based in Phoenix. Their mission statement made Martha's hands shake. We provide emergency financial assistance to families caring for children with life-threatening medical conditions. When insurance fails and families face bankruptcy, we step in, with housing assistance, medical bill payment, and respite care. No child should lose their home because they're sick. No parent should have to choose between bankruptcy and their child's life. Martha clicked through the website, read about families they'd helped. Saw photographs of children, some who'd survived, some who hadn't, all of them loved by parents who were fighting the same fight the Ashfords had fought. There was a donation button. Martha stared at it for a long time. $18,000. It could change their lives, could give them security, could mean not lying awake at night wondering if the trailer park would evict them, if Gerald's medication would run out, if this was the month they'd finally lose the last of their dignity. But it could also help other families, could be the difference between a family keeping their home or losing it, could buy a child another year, another month, another day. Martha thought about Sophie's smile, about the yellow dress and the daisies, about what Lawrence and Margaret would want. She clicked the donation button. The form loaded. It asked for an amount. Martha's finger hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed $15,000. She kept $3,000 for rent and food and Gerald's medication, for the emergencies that would come because they always did. But $15,000 went to Sophie's Hope. In the comment box, she wrote, "In memory of Sophie Marie Ashford, April 3rd, 2010, September 22nd, 2016. She was loved." Then she hit submit before she could change her mind. The confirmation screen appeared. "Thank you for your donation. Because of people like you, families can stay together." Martha closed the laptop and sat very still. She felt lighter and heavier, and like she'd just done something that made no practical sense and perfect emotional sense at the same time. When Gerald came home 2 hours later, she told him. He sat down at the card table, stared at the laptop, at the confirmation email Martha had pulled up on the screen. 15, he said. Yes. We kept 3. Yes. That's enough for 3 months of rent and food, maybe 4 if we're careful. I know. Gerald was quiet for a long time. Martha watched his face, trying to read him, trying to see if he was angry or relieved or something else entirely. Finally, he looked up at her. "I love you," he said. Martha started to cry. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have asked you first. It's your money too. But I just kept thinking about Sophie and how hard her parents fought and how they lost everything anyway. And I thought, maybe we could help make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. Maybe we—" "You did the right thing," Gerald interrupted. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, the way he had on their wedding day 52 years ago, when she'd been young and hopeful and believed the world was fair. "You did exactly the right thing," he whispered into her hair. They stood there in their tiny trailer, holding each other, and Martha felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. Sophie's Hope called 3 days later. Martha almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar,
And they'd learned long ago that unfamiliar numbers usually meant debt collectors or scammers or telemarketers selling things they couldn't afford. But something made her pick up. "Mrs. Hendricks, this is Rebecca Sanchez from Sophie's Hope. I'm calling about your donation." Martha's stomach dropped. Had she done something wrong? Was the money not real somehow? "I wanted to thank you personally," Rebecca continued. "Donations of this size, they're rare, especially from individual donors. Most of our funding comes from corporate sponsors and grants. But your $15,000, Mrs. Hendricks, that's going to help 3 families. 3 families who were about to lose their homes because their children need full-time medical care. You just gave them breathing room." Martha couldn't speak. "I looked up the name you gave in the memorial field," Rebecca said. "Sophie Ashford. I couldn't find an obituary or any information. Was she a family member?" "No," Martha said. "She was... How did you explain? She was a little girl whose family lost everything trying to keep her alive. My husband and I found her things in a storage unit. We wanted to do something that would honor her and her parents." "May I ask how you came to have $15,000 to donate? I don't mean to pry, but if there's a story here, stories help us raise more money, help more families." Martha told her about the auction, about Unit 247, about the mahogany desk and the wheelchair and the box of photographs, about Sophie's smile and Margaret's love and Lawrence's tears, about the bankruptcy and the GoFundMe and the hospice in Oregon, about 6 years of a life that had mattered. Rebecca was crying by the time Martha finished. "Would you be willing to let us share this story?" she asked. "With your permission, we could write it up for our newsletter, for our social media. We'd keep your details private if you wanted, but this is exactly the kind of story that makes people understand why this work matters." Martha looked around the trailer, at the fold-out couch and the hot plate and the card table, at the life she and Gerald had built from the scraps they'd been left. "Yes," she said. "Share it. Tell people about Sophie. Make sure they remember her." "Thank you. And Mrs. Hendricks, what you did, giving away most of the money when you clearly needed it yourselves, that's extraordinary." "It was the right thing to do." "Maybe, but most people wouldn't have done it. Most people would have kept it all." After Rebecca hung up, Martha sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. Most people would have kept it all. Maybe that was true. Maybe most people would have looked at $18,000 and seen salvation, seen security, seen a buffer against the world's cruelty. But Martha had looked at it and seen Sophie, had seen a little girl in a yellow dress who deserved to be remembered. Had seen parents who'd fought harder than anyone should have to fight and lost everything anyway. And she'd decided that maybe, just maybe, she could help make sure fewer families had to fight that same fight. Was it practical? No. Was it going to solve their problems? No. But it was good. And in a world that had been cruel to the Ashfords and cruel to Martha and Gerald and cruel to so many people who were just trying to survive, good mattered. The newsletter from Sophie's Hope arrived in Martha's email 2 weeks later. She opened it on the laptop, Gerald reading over her shoulder. There was Sophie's photograph, the one from the garden with the daisies and the yellow dress. Martha had sent it to Rebecca with Jenny's permission. And below it, the story. Not Martha's story, Sophie's story. The story of a little girl who'd lived 6 years against impossible odds, who'd smiled despite the ventilator and the feeding tubes and the wheelchair, who'd taught everyone who knew her about joy and resilience and love. The story of parents who'd fought the insurance companies and the medical system and their own exhaustion to give their daughter the best life possible, who'd bankrupted themselves and lost their home and ultimately taken their child to Oregon so she could die in peace instead of in pain. The story of a storage unit in the California desert that held the last evidence of a family who'd loved so hard they'd destroyed themselves. And at the end, a line that made Martha's vision blur.
Thanks to an anonymous donor who discovered Sophie's story, we're able to help 3 families stay in their homes this month. 3 children will continue to receive the care they need. 3 families won't have to make the choice the Ashfords made. Sophie's legacy lives on. Gerald's arm came around Martha's shoulders. "You did good," he said quietly. Martha closed the laptop. She thought about the $3,000 they had left. About the rent that was due in a week. About Gerald's medication and the car insurance and the 100 small expenses that added up to more than they had. They'd be broke again in 2 months, maybe 3. But for right now, in this moment, they'd done something that mattered. "Yeah," Martha said, "I think we did." Jenny Morrison called on a Saturday morning 3 weeks later. "Martha, I wanted you to know, I created the memorial page for Sophie. It's live. Would you like to see it?" Martha opened her laptop, followed the link Jenny texted her. The page was simple, just photographs and stories. Sophie as a baby, Sophie in her wheelchair, Sophie at the beach, at birthday parties, at therapy appointments, Sophie living. And below the photographs, testimonials from people who'd known her, from Jenny and other nurses, from therapists, from parents in the SMA support group. "Sophie taught me that joy isn't about what you can do physically. It's about how you love. I was having the worst day when I met Sophie. She smiled at me and everything felt better. Her parents loved her so much. We should all be loved like that." Hundreds of comments, thousands of shares. Sophie was being remembered. At the bottom of the page, Jenny had added a note. "Sophie's family lost everything trying to keep her alive. They're not alone. If you want to help families like the Ashfords, please consider donating to Sophie's Hope, a nonprofit that provides financial assistance to families caring for children with life-threatening medical conditions." Martha clicked the link. It led to Sophie's Hope's donation page. The progress bar showed they'd raised $4,700 since the newsletter went out. $4,700. Because of Sophie's story. Because people had read it and decided to help. Martha felt something unfamiliar in her chest. Hope. Not for herself. She and Gerald would be okay. Somehow, they always were. But hope that maybe the world wasn't entirely cruel. That maybe stories mattered. That maybe one little girl's life could ripple outward and touch people who'd never met her. That maybe that was enough. The rent came due. Martha paid it with the last of their $3,000. They had $247 left after that. Enough for food for 2 weeks if they were careful. Gerald's medication was running low again. They'd have to choose soon between food and pills. But they'd made that choice before. They'd make it again. The important thing was that they'd done something good, something that mattered. Martha told herself that on the nights when she lay awake on the fold-out couch, listening to Gerald's labored breathing, wondering if this was the month his heart would finally give out because they couldn't afford the medication that kept it beating. She told herself that when the trailer park manager knocked on their door with another late fee notice. She told herself that when the Honda's transmission started making a grinding noise they couldn't afford to fix. Good mattered. Sophie mattered. That had to be enough. The letter came on a Tuesday in October, 2 months after they'd emptied Unit 247. It was addressed to Martha Hendricks, and the return address said, Sophie's Hope. Martha opened it carefully. Inside was a single page typed on official letterhead. Dear Mrs. Hendricks, we wanted to update you on the impact of your donation and Sophie's story. Since we published the newsletter featuring Sophie Ashford, we've received over $40,000 in donations. Because of the attention her story brought to our cause, we've been able to help 12 families so far, including the 3 your initial donation covered. But something else happened that we wanted you to know about. A woman named Margaret Ashford contacted us last week. She saw Sophie's memorial page. She's been living in Oregon with her husband Lawrence for the past 7 years, and she says seeing her daughter remembered, seeing that people cared, was the first time she'd felt hope since Sophie died. Mrs. Ashford asked if we could put her in touch with the person who donated in Sophie's memory. We told her we'd reach out to you and ask permission. If you're willing, please call me at the number below. The Ashfords would very much like to speak with you. The letter was signed by Rebecca Sanchez. Martha's hands were shaking so hard she dropped the page. "Gerald," she called, "Gerald, come here." He emerged from the tiny bathroom, drying his hands on a towel. "What's wrong?" "They found them. The Ashfords. They're alive. They're in Oregon, and they want to talk to us." Gerald took the letter. Read it again." "Jesus," he whispered. Martha was already dialing the number. Rebecca answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Hendricks?" Yes, I want to talk to them. Can you give me their number?" "I can do you one better. Are you available for a video call? They're waiting." 5 minutes later, Martha and Gerald sat at their card table, the laptop open in front of them, staring at two faces they'd only seen in photographs. Lawrence Ashford looked older than his pictures. His hair was completely gray now, his face lined with grief. But his eyes were kind, just as they'd been in the photograph from the storage unit. Beside him, Margaret, still blonde but thinner than she'd been, her face showing the weight of 7 years without her daughter. They were sitting in what looked like a small apartment, plain walls, second-hand furniture, a space that spoke of starting over. "Mrs. Hendricks?" Lawrence's voice cracked. "Mr. Hendricks?" "Call me Martha. This is Gerald." "I'm Lawrence. This is Margaret. He stopped, collected himself. "We don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank us," Martha said. "We didn't do anything." "You remembered her." Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper. "Sophie, you found her things, and you didn't just throw them away. You tried to find us, and when you couldn't, you did something good in her name. Do you know what that means to us?" Martha felt tears on her cheeks. She deserved to be remembered. "We couldn't come back," Lawrence said. "After Sophie died, we couldn't face it, couldn't go back to Barstow, couldn't touch her things. We just ran, left everything behind and came to Oregon and tried to pretend we could start over." "But you can't start over when you're carrying that much grief," Margaret added. "We've been in therapy for 5 years, working through it, but we've never talked about Sophie publicly, never shared her story. We were too broken." "And then we saw the memorial page," Lawrence said. "Saw our daughter's face. Saw all these people who remembered her, who cared. Saw that someone, you, had honored her memory by helping other families. And we realized we'd been selfish, keeping her to ourselves, letting our grief wall her off from the world. The donation you made," Margaret said, "the $15,000. Jenny told us you kept almost nothing for yourselves, that you and your husband are struggling. Why did you do that?" Martha looked at Gerald, then back at the screen. "Because Sophie mattered," she said simply, "and because you loved her enough to lose everything. That kind of love, it shouldn't be forgotten. It should mean something." Lawrence was crying openly now. Margaret put her hand over his. "We're going to start a foundation," Margaret said, "in Sophie's name. We've been talking about it for years, but we never had the courage. Now we do, because of you. We're going to help families like ours, make sure no parent has to choose between bankruptcy and their child's life." "Sophie's Hope is already doing that," Martha said. "I know, and we're going to work with them. But we also want to fight on the policy side, change the laws, make insurance companies cover what they should cover. It's going to take years, maybe decades, but we're going to do it. For Sophie, for all the kids like her." Martha couldn't speak, could only nod. "There's something else," Lawrence said. He glanced at Margaret, who nodded. Jenny told us about your situation, about the trailer park and your husband's medication and how you're struggling. We've been saving for 7 years, working minimum wage jobs, living on nothing, putting every penny away. We wanted to rebuild, to have something again. We have $40,000 saved, Margaret said. We're sending you half. No, Martha started. Please, Margaret's voice was firm. You gave us something we thought we'd lost forever. You gave us permission to remember our daughter, to celebrate her life instead of just mourning her death. $20,000 doesn't even begin to cover what that's worth. We can't accept. You can, Lauren said, and you will. Because Sophie would have wanted it. She loved when people were kind, loved when people helped each other. This is us paying forward the kindness you showed her, showed us. The call ended 20 minutes later, after more tears and more thanks, and Martha and Gerald promising to stay in touch. When the screen went dark, Martha and Gerald sat in silence. $20,000, Gerald finally said. We can't take it. They're right, though. We can pay off the trailer lot, buy my medication, fix the car, maybe even have enough left over to what? Martha turned to look at her husband. To be comfortable? To stop worrying for a while? Yes. Is that so wrong? Martha thought about Sophie, about 6 years of a life lived despite impossible odds, about parents who'd fought and lost and somehow found the strength to keep going. No, she said, it's not wrong, but we're not keeping all of it. Gerald smiled, slow and knowing. How much are we keeping? Half. 10,000. The rest goes to Sophie's hope. Martha, 10,000 is more than we've ever had. It'll cover rent for a year, your medication, the car repairs, everything we need. But the rest can help more families, can be part of Sophie's legacy. Gerald looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. Okay. The money arrived 2 weeks later. $20,000, wired directly to their bank account. The first time in their lives Martha and Gerald had received a bank wire. Martha stared at the balance on the laptop screen. $20,024.07. More money than they'd had in 5 years. She took a breath, logged in to Sophie's Hope's donation page, typed in 10,000. This time, in the memorial field, she wrote, "From Lawrence and Margaret Ashford, in loving memory of their daughter Sophie Marie Ashford. May her legacy help families stay together." She hit submit. Then she closed the laptop and went outside, where Gerald was sitting on the trailer steps in the October sun. "It's done," she said. "How much did we keep?" 10,000 and change. The rest went to Sophie's Hope. Gerald nodded. He didn't look surprised. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the desert light fade toward evening. Somewhere in the trailer park, someone was playing music. Country western, twangy and sad. A dog barked, children laughed. Life continuing. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Martha asked. "With the money?" "With all of it. Finding the Ashfords, donating most of the storage unit money, giving away half of what they sent us. Do you think it made a difference?" Gerald reached for her hand. His skin was papery and thin, the bones prominent, but his grip was warm. "I think," he said slowly, "that a little girl named Sophie lived 6 years in a body that should have only given her 6 months. And her parents loved her so much they destroyed themselves trying to keep her alive. And when they couldn't anymore, they made sure she died peacefully. And then they put her memory in a storage unit and tried to forget." He paused, squeezed her hand. "And then you came along. You and your stubborn need to do the right thing. And you took that memory out of the darkness and put it back in the light. You made sure Sophie mattered, made sure her parents' love mattered, made sure all of it meant something."
"But did it help anyone?" Martha pressed. "Really?"
"Yes, it helped 17 families keep their homes. It helped the Ashfords find hope again.
It helped you and me remember why we're still here, why we keep fighting even when everything's hard.
Why are we here? Martha asked. Still fighting?
Gerald smiled. It was the smile she'd fallen in love with 52 years ago, when they'd both been young and foolish and thought love was enough. Because that's what you do, he said. You fight. Not because you're going to win, not because the world is fair, or because good things happen to good people. You fight because fighting means you're still alive, still choosing, still making it matter.
Martha leaned her head on his shoulder, felt the warmth of him, the solidity.
Sophie mattered, she said.
Yeah, Gerald agreed. She did.
They sat there as the sun set over the trailer park, over the desert, over the corrugated steel buildings where forgotten things waited in the darkness for someone to remember them. And Martha thought about the storage unit, Unit 247, now empty except for dust and echoes. Thought about the mahogany desk, and the wheelchair, and the box of photographs that had changed 3 lives. Sophie's, who'd been remembered. The Ashfords, who'd found hope. And hers and Gerald's, who'd learned that doing good mattered more than being comfortable. The $3,000 had become $18,000. The $18,000 had become $40,000. And out of that $40,000, 17 families had gotten help. Sophie had gotten a memorial. The Ashfords had gotten healing. And Martha and Gerald had gotten something they'd lost a long time ago: purpose. Was it enough? Martha looked at the trailer, small and shabby and home, and at Gerald beside her, his heart still beating despite the medication that kept running out, and at the sunset painting the desert gold. Yeah, she said, answering a question no one had asked. It's enough. 6 months later, Martha got an email from Rebecca Sanchez. Dear Martha, I wanted to give you an update on Sophie's story. Thanks to the attention from the newsletter and the memorial page, we've raised over $200,000 in donations. We've been able to help 47 families so far. 47 children are getting the care they need. 47 families are staying together. But something even bigger happened. A reporter from the Los Angeles Times saw the story and wrote an article about Sophie and the Ashfords and the problems with insurance coverage for children with complex medical needs. That article got picked up nationally. We've had senators and congresspeople contact us. There's talk of legislation, actual policy changes that could prevent what happened to Sophie from happening to other families. It's going to take time, maybe years, but it's starting. And it started because you found a little girl's wheelchair in a storage unit and decided she mattered. The Ashfords asked me to tell you they're launching the Sophie Ashford Foundation this summer. They want you and Gerald at the inaugural event. All expenses paid. Will you come? Martha showed the email to Gerald. Los Angeles, he said. Fancy. We've never been anywhere fancy. Maybe it's time. Martha looked at the screen, at the words, "You decided she mattered." Yes, she said, we'll go. The event was in July, in a hotel conference room in downtown Los Angeles that probably cost more to rent for one night than Martha and Gerald paid for a year's worth of trailer lot fees. Martha wore a dress she'd found at Goodwill, navy blue, simple, respectable. Gerald wore his one suit, the one he'd bought for his mother's funeral 20 years ago and had worn 3 times since. They felt out of place among the donors and the doctors and the families who'd come to celebrate Sophie's life and the foundation being created in her name. But then Lawrence and Margaret found them. Margaret hugged Martha so hard she couldn't breathe. You came. Of course we came. Come on, we want you to meet everyone. Tell them Sophie's story. They spent the evening telling that story, over and over, to reporters and donors and families. Martha talked about finding the wheelchair. Gerald talked about the box of photographs. Together, they explained why they'd given away money they desperately needed.
Because Sophie deserved to be remembered, Martha said every time. Because her life mattered. At the end of the night, Lawrence stood at the podium and gave a speech about Sophie, about her smile, about the 6 years they'd gotten to be her parents, about the way love could bankrupt you and destroy you and still be worth it. But Sophie's legacy isn't just what she taught us, he said. It's what she's teaching others now. 2 people, Martha and Gerald Hendricks, found our daughter's story in a storage unit. They could have thrown it away. They could have kept the money from selling her things and never looked back. But they didn't. They chose to remember, to honor her, to make her life mean something beyond our family. He gestured to Martha and Gerald in the crowd. Because of them, Sophie's hope has helped dozens of families. Because of them, we found the courage to start this foundation. Because of them, there's legislation being drafted right now that could change how insurance companies treat children with complex medical needs. His voice broke. Because of them, our daughter's life is saving others. The room erupted in applause. Martha felt Gerald's hand find hers. They sat together in a fancy hotel conference room in Los Angeles, surrounded by people they'd never met, listening to applause for something they'd done without thinking, without planning, without any expectation of recognition. And Martha thought, this is what matters. Not the money or the trailer or the struggle to survive. This, making a difference, helping someone, remembering a little girl who deserved to be remembered. Afterward, on the drive back to Barstow in the Honda, still running, still coughing, but still theirs, Gerald was quiet for a long time. "You okay?" Martha asked. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "About Sophie. About how one life can ripple out and touch so many others. About how we almost didn't bid on that storage unit. About how different everything would be if we just walked away. But we didn't. No, we didn't." They drove through the darkness, the highway stretching ahead of them, the desert vast and empty on either side. "Thank you," Gerald said finally. "For what?" "For being who you are. For seeing that storage unit and seeing a little girl instead of furniture. For refusing to let Sophie be forgotten." Martha smiled. "You helped. I held your hand. You did the work. We did it together." They pulled into Desert Vista just after midnight. Lot 37 was dark, the trailer waiting. Inside, the fold-out couch, the hot plate, the card table. The life they'd built from scraps. But also each other. And the knowledge that they'd done something good, something that mattered. Martha climbed the rusted steps and unlocked the door. Gerald followed her inside. Tomorrow, they'd worry about rent and medication and the car's transmission. Tomorrow, they'd count their money and plan their budget and figure out how to stretch $10 into a week's worth of food. But tonight, they'd sleep, knowing that a little girl named Sophie Marie Ashford, who'd lived 6 years against impossible odds, who'd smiled despite everything, who'd taught everyone who knew her about joy and resilience and love, was being remembered. And that was enough. That was everything. Martha stood at the window of the trailer, looking out at the desert night. The stars were bright, brighter than they ever were in the city, bright enough to see by. She thought about Sophie, about the wheelchair and the rabbit and the photographs, about a family who'd loved so hard they'd destroyed themselves, about a storage unit that had held not just furniture, but a legacy, about second chances and forgotten treasures and the way ordinary lives could collide with extraordinary fate. And she thought, Sophie's story didn't end in that storage unit. It started there. For us, for the families Sophie's hope has helped, for everyone who reads about her and decides to do something kind. That's what legacy means. Not monuments or headlines, just ripples. Just one life touching another and another and another until the whole world is a little different than it was before. Martha turned from the window. Gerald was already asleep on the fold-out couch, his breathing steady and sure. She climbed in beside him carefully, not wanting to wake him, felt his warmth, his presence. 52 years, and he was still here, still hers. Outside, the desert wind whispered across the trailer park. Somewhere, a child laughed in their sleep. Somewhere, a family was together, saved by a donation they'd never trace back to a storage unit in Barstow and 2 old people who chose to do good instead of survive. Martha closed her eyes.
And in the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw Sophie, 6 years old, wearing a yellow dress crowned with daisies, smiling at the camera with her mother's forehead pressed against her own. Remembered, loved, alive in the way that mattered most, in the hearts of people who'd never met her but carried her forward anyway.